Hey everyone, it is Leanne the lawyer, and I am here with my new video. It is part one of my series on criminal law. There will be 8 parts, so there will be 8 videos. Since this is the first video, this is just a basic introduction to criminal law. We're going to talk about things like what the definition is, where it came from, where you can find criminal laws as you're doing your research, what are the main purposes of criminal law, and how do we punish or more, I guess, in this video, why do we punish? And we'll talk about specific nuts and bolts of different crimes and different punishments as we move on into other videos. This particular video, though, is just your basic introduction to criminal law. So let's get started. All right, so first of all, what is a crime? Well, in order for me to actually describe this to you, I like to go all the way back to the colonists when they came over from England. Yes, I'm going that far back. I'm going that far back because one of our sources of criminal law, as you'll see in one of the future slides here, is the common law. The common law system was brought over from England with the colonists. It's how things were done. The nuts and bolts, the basics of this, is that crimes are things that people in society don't want other people to do. They find it disruptive, they find it morally wrong, they find it to be dangerous. So when we go back to the common law, you think about how times were way back in the day and things that were important to people. For example, people didn't have a lot of money, maybe they didn't have any property, but a lot of people had livestock. So one of the things I like to think about is, well, if I was one of those colonists and I had a goat, which would be very important to me because it would provide me with potential meat, or it could provide me with milk. I could make cheese, butter, yada yada, all that stuff. I would be very unhappy if my neighbor Jim came over and killed my goat. Yes, I would be absolutely outraged. I would imagine that the other people in my village would be very outraged to see that Jim had killed a goat because they would be afraid that Jim would be killing their goats as well. I would guess that this would be one of those things that would cause everyone in the village to say, there should be a law against that. That's how crimes got started, okay? That is what we are talking about. And even though it was my goat that was killed, because this causes a societal outrage, there would be a person in the village who would be elected to represent the village. And in modern day times, this person is called a prosecutor. And they represent the local, state, or federal government. And they would prosecute Jim, not on behalf of me, the goat owner, but on behalf of the entire village. That's the difference between criminal law and civil law. One of the main differences, and I've gone over this in other videos. But we are going to be focusing on that aspect where the government has the authority. They have an elected person, a prosecutor, who represents society as a whole. Okay, so just remember, with criminal law, it is something that everybody's upset about. Nobody wants to have happen. And the prosecution represents the people, not a particular individual. All right, some more historical notes. Now, I talked about this idea that everybody in the village would say, there should be a law against that. Jim just went over and he killed her goat. Just cold-blooded killed her goat. Well, that's characterized by this Latin maxim. It's called the principle of legality. I'm not going to try to pronounce the Latin. It does translate to no penalty without a law. So, in other words, Jim came over with a brand new village. We're one of the, American colonists. Brand new village. And Jim came over, he killed my goat. Well, currently there's no anti-goat killing laws in our village, but there was an outcry. Jim, unfortunately for me, and unfortunately for the village, cannot be prosecuted after he killed my goat because there was no law and he did not know that he had to curtail his behavior. He had to stop himself from killing my goat. There's no law in the books. There's no law against it. He was able to do that. But everyone was very upset about it and they had an outcry. And in response to that, we can assume that the village elders got together and they wrote a law, thou shalt not kill any goats. Okay? without the owner's consent, because maybe you bring it to your neighbor and say, hey, I don't really want to kill the goat. I need the meat, but we're friends now. I've had him for a number of years, but we're hungry. Can you kill him for me? Because I just don't want to do it. That would be with consent. So I'm assuming that this law is, you're killing someone else's goat without their consent. And you would have to establish some kind of punishment for that. If you do violate this law, then you're going to go to jail for a year and you're going to have to pay a fine of 5 goats to your neighbor or whoever's goat that you killed. Okay? So that's the whole idea of this principle of legality, and that, hey, if there's no law on the books, it's not a crime. All right, next. The government has the power to do this. They have the power to get together and write these laws. That is one of their inherent authorities. So they can both influence your behavior through establishing criminal laws, and they can also do it through the civil law system. Always remember, when they are writing criminal laws, they have to be balanced with your rights as established under the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. You cannot write a criminal law that infringes upon your freedom of religion or your freedom of speech. Make sense? All right, so just make sure that sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, well, that law is unconstitutional. Well, the reason why it would be unconstitutional is because perhaps they've crafted a law that somehow conflicts with one of your fundamental civil liberties. All right, so where do we find criminal law? So if you're doing your research, well, you're going to find it in the common law. We talked about the common law. It was developed in England. It was brought to the United States by the English colonists. But the main thing that you need to know about the common law is that there's this overriding principle, and I do know how to pronounce this one. It's called stare decisis, okay? It's the doctrine that judicial decisions stand as precedents for cases arising in the future. So now, Jim killed my goat. Unfortunately, there was no law against it when Jim killed my goat, so there was nothing I can do about it. But the village elders got together, they wrote this law. Jim now is killing someone else's goat, because he's a goat killer. We all know he's a goat killer. Well, he went ahead and killed this other person's goat. Well, when he killed that other person's goat, the village elders, they had their prosecutor come, and on behalf of the entire village, Jim was prosecuted. He spent a year in jail, and he had to pay 5 goats to that person whose goat that he slaughtered. Okay? There we go. It worked. That's our first judicial decision on the books. Now, Mary, she also killed a goat after the law was established. Mary, however, said, wait, I killed this goat in self-defense. And they're like, what do you mean? She came in, she had bite marks all over her arms, she had hoof prints on her forehead. Quite a scene. She claimed self-defense. Well, the village elders looked at that while she was being prosecuted. The judge, the jury, they looked at it and they said, wow, that seems like it might be self-defense. But the law says that she killed a goat, therefore she goes to jail. She went to jail, but she appealed it to a higher authority. So once she appealed it, the appellate court looked at it and they said, well, when we look at the legislative intent of this law, when we look at it, we don't think that the village elders, whenever they wrote this law, the legislatures, we don't think that they meant to prevent people from killing goats in self-defense. I mean, it seems like it was either her or the goat in this situation. I mean, what choice did she have? We're going to carve out a little bit of an exception to this rule. And so they did in that judicial decision. They carved out the exception of self-defense. So they decided that Mary, in fact, did kill a goat, but she had a justifiable reason for doing so. The idea of stare decisis says that these court decisions become what is called precedent. Precedent is that prior decision of the same court or of a higher court which a judge must follow in deciding a subsequent case. So Mary, her case carved out that exception for self-defense. So now when Sarah kills a goat, and she does so in self-defense, she can use Mary's case and say, Your Honor, in State versus Mary, Village versus Mary, she was allowed to protect herself because she was being attacked by a goat. And the judge looks at it and says, you're right, this is precedent. I have to follow this, and I do find that you did kill the goat in self-defense, and therefore you go free. That is the idea. That's our common law system. Those are cases. That is called case law, and they are based on judicial decisions, but they arise from particular incidents, things that actually happen, and those judges have to interpret the law, and they look at a variety of factors. So this is a very simplistic view of it, but that's the basics of it. Where else do we find criminal laws so that you know under the principle of legality what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do? Well, the U.S. Constitution lays out some things, and so does the state constitutions, things like treason, those types of things. You want to not do that because that you can be held accountable for those. Where else would you find criminal law? Well, you would find it in the statutory law. What I've been describing, the village elders, also known as the legislature, when they get together and they write laws where the public outcry says there should be a law against that, and the legislature writes down laws, those are also called codes. That's the statutory law. And there's both federal and state laws. There's also ordinances. This is at your local level. This is your city has created laws. A lot of times they're zoning laws. They are things like parking and, those types of things. Very, tiny laws, city laws, ordinances, but they're still laws. And a lot of them, they make things a crime. For example, leash laws. You can't walk your dog in certain places without a leash. Okay, those are city laws. Those are ordinances. You don't want to violate those because you could be fined. Administrative laws. These are regulations promulgated by administrative agencies. A lot of times they deal with things, administrative agencies deal with things like food handling. You want to make sure that you're requiring all of your employees to have a food handler's card at certain restaurants. When you're applying for food stamps, you have to meet certain income requirements. These are all regulations that are promulgated by regulatory agencies. And there are things that also prescribe certain laws, criminal laws, things that you can do that if you violate them, you're going to find yourself either incarcerated or fined if you violate those regulations. Also, court rules. The court has certain things that they hold you to. For example, how long you have to file a response to something, how long you have to defend yourself in certain ways. So those court rules, they're procedural. We will have a whole nother series on procedural law, and I'll get to those, but some of those things constitute crimes. Now, the model penal code, I want to make this very clear. This is not law. The model penal code, if you look at the word model, and I always think of like a model airplane. It is a tiny version of a real airplane. A model spaceship would be a tiny version of something that you envision what a spaceship would look like if we had one. I mean, we do have some spaceships, but let's talk about like an alien type spaceship. If you could have the perfect spaceship, what would it look like? Well, you can create a little model of it. Well, the model penal code, it was developed by the American Law Institute. It's a group of scholars getting together, very intelligent people, looked at the criminal justice system, and they said, if we had the perfect set of laws in the criminal justice system, this is what they would look like. This is the perfect murder statute. This is the perfect arson statute. This is the perfect kidnapping statute. That's what they've done, is they've put together the model law, how they envision the ideal law to be. States have looked at these, and unless a state has adopted the model penal code's version of the law, it is not law. It is only law once it has been adopted by a state or federal body. In that case, if it's adopted, yes, it's law. But otherwise, it's just the perfect envisionment of what the law would be. So that's a good source, but it doesn't mean that that is the law. Now, what are the purposes? I've talked about it. We're in this village. We've got goat killers running rampant in my village. We want to protect society. But they're not going to be tiny things. Sometimes they are, but for the most part, they are larger crimes. These are things that are considered to be morally wrong or extremely dangerous. It's serious behavior. And how we prevent this behavior from happening is punishment. The goals of punishment are on the last slide here. And these goals of punishment, why do we punish? Well, we want to prevent people from this behavior. And unless there's some kind of punishment, I mean, how else are we going to deter this behavior? So that's why the first two are deterrence. Now, the term specific deterrence refers to Jim the goat killer. Okay, Jim, he likes to murder goats. Specific deterrence would be aimed at Jim, teaching Jim never to do that again. Okay, he went to jail for a year and he had to pay 5 goats. Okay, hopefully Jim learned his lesson after that year and the payment of 5 goats, and he doesn't go around killing more goats. Now, when we punish Jim, we have what's called general deterrence. The rest of the village look at it and go, wow, did you see what happened to Jim? Yeah, Jim killed a goat. He went to jail for a year, had to pay 5 goats. Woo, I'm not going to kill any goats. Yeah, me neither. That's general deterrence. That's where you see somebody else getting punished and it works on you. You're like, I'm not going to be that guy. Also, sometimes a severe punishment, even if nobody's been punished for the crime yet, you look at it and you go, wow, that's a really severe punishment for that particular crime. I don't want anybody, nobody should have to do that. Okay, that's the idea of general deterrence. These are the motivations for punishments. Now, incapacitation. So let's say, Jim killed that first goat, he got away with it as mine. He killed another goat, he had to spend a year, and then he had 5 more goats that he had to pay. But then he gets out after that year, he hasn't learned his lesson, he kills 3 more goats. At this point, we have to incapacitate Jim. We have to put him in jail for a much longer time. Incapacitation is where you're removing that individual from society for what is considered to be an appropriate amount of time. The death penalty is the ultimate incapacitation. So for those states that, have the death penalty, if you think that the crime that they committed was egregious enough that they deserve to die and permanently incapacitate them, permanently remove them from society, that's what you will do to them. Okay? So, now remember, incapacitation, it's going to vary. So what if we put Jim in jail for 10 years after he kills those goats? He's going to get out because Jim was only 20 when he committed his first crime. So he's actually going to get out. He's still going to be a relatively young man. Rehabilitation is something that can happen while Jim is incapacitated, while he is incarcerated. Maybe he's on probation, maybe he's actually in jail, maybe he's on home confinement. But maybe we need to help Jim so that Jim stops killing goats because we can't, it's not severe enough that he requires a death penalty, but he's still a menace. So maybe we should give him a high school education. Maybe we should give him a degree in some kind of technical job or skill. Maybe we can help him. Maybe we'll give him counseling. Maybe we can have him do community service. These are all things that are geared toward rehabilitation. So a lot of criminal justice reform talks about how we can rehabilitate people because, quite frankly, you really can't keep every criminal in jail forever. It's just not feasible. So at one point, you have to recognize that you're putting people back out on the streets that have had no rehabilitation or very little. So these are pretty important programs coming from a criminal justice standpoint. If you want to continue to help society, if the whole point of criminal law is to protect society, and then you're putting people back out there that are just going to do it again, you really need to look at rehabilitation as an option. And then retribution is another thing, and this is usually, in my opinion, it comes from death penalty cases are a lot about retribution. It's societal vengeance. It's like, you killed my person that I loved, and now we're going to kill you. Or we're going to put you in life in prison without the possibility of parole because you are a terrible, terrible human being. That is vengeance. That is vengeance against the person. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it. I think we should just recognize that this is often the reason for death penalty and for severe sentences. You just want to get back at that person. You also want to completely remove them from society. A lot of people make the argument that the death penalty is about general deterrence. Oh, well, I mean, if they see that they're going to get the death penalty, they're not going to do that crime. Quite honestly, having worked in the criminal justice system for a long time, I feel like people that are going to commit crimes that are worthy, that are bad enough, severe enough for the death penalty or life in prison, are not the kind of people who sit around saying, oh, well, if I commit this crime, I'm going to go to jail. Either they don't think they're going to get caught or they really don't care if they get the death penalty. they're not thinking about it during the commission of the crime or just prior to the commission of the crime. They're only thinking about the crime. They're not the type of people who forward think that way. If they were, they would not have committed the crime in the first place. So the death penalty works as a general deterrence on people like you and me who are not the kind of people who are going to go out and commit crimes worthy of the death penalty. People who commit death penalty crimes, those people, I think it has less of an effect on, and I think more of their punishment works as a societal vengeance upon them for being such horrific people. So normally I don't like to inject my opinion into things, but after years of thinking about this, I think that's how it works. I don't think it's a wrong thing. I just think that's the basis of those types of punishments. And I'm not going to make any statement about whether or not I agree with the death penalty. So, but I hope you, like and subscribe, as everyone says, at the end of these types of videos. But I also encourage you, I will be posting the remaining videos in the series, and I hope you enjoy them. Thank you.